Dear listener, this little talk is designed to tell you everything that you need to know about the science of getting ahead. Now let's assume that you're a young, healthy, eager, independent individual ready to rise to the top of the business world as quickly and efficiently as possible. Know that you can. If you have education, intelligence, and ability, so much the better. But know that thousands have reached the top without any of these attributes. That is a quote by Shepard Mead in his 1952 novel, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. So as I was preparing for this talk, I was really struggling with developing a central theme, a central idea. I had a lot of great little ideas and a lot of great things that I had done and that I was passionate about, but I didn't know one central theme, one main point. So I ran through this analysis of sort of my education and how I began to realize exactly what I was passionate about. This all started off in high school. High school was a great time for me. I was a super ambitious individual, loved extracurricular activities. However, I had a super average GPA and a super average ACT score. The first time I scored a 17, the second time I got a 21, and the third time I landed that 23. So all of a sudden, these numbers started to define me. This 3.4 GPA determined which colleges I could get into, determined which scholarships I could apply for, and this 23 GPA, this 23 ACT score really started to determine exactly who I was. So I applied to 3 universities. I got into the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, go Mocs. I got into the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. I was waitlisted, and then I got denied from the University of Appalachian State. And so finally the University of Tennessee decided that my 23 ACT score was good enough for them to let me into their college. So I get into my freshman year and finish my freshman year with a strong 1.94 GPA average. Mom and Dad were not too happy about that. But again, we're seeing this number, this 1.94 GPA average, sort of defining who I am and defining what classes I can take, what courses I can be a part of, what scholarships I can have. It's really determining my career path and who I'm going to be as an individual. 1.94 GPA was my identity. So moving on to sophomore year, I spent the majority of it alone, playing guitar, doing CrossFit workouts, and journaling, just sort of trying to develop this sense of who I am, develop this sense of this creative aspect. I knew I loved these creative activities. I loved to play guitar, I loved to journal, I loved to read, and I loved to exercise my mind in those ways. I just didn't necessarily like to take multiple choice exams. I didn't like to write essays, things like that. So I started to develop this creative mindset and really embrace exactly what that was. Moving on to myself now as a junior here at the University of Tennessee, I own my own business. I rose up to a 3.1 GPA average. I've received funding for my company. I've acquired 2 highly competitive internships, and I'm now speaking to you as the TEDxUTK student speaker. So the real question here is, what the hell happened? What happened between my freshman year punk self to what I'm doing today? Well, I realized a few things. I realized that I was really great at public speaking. I really could connect with an audience, and I really loved to talk in front of people. These outgoing attributes sort of started to play into effect, and I really started to embrace these attributes. I started to realize I was good at things, and I started to embrace exactly who I was. And this all started to revolve around this idea of creative disruption. How can I sort of poke holes in this education system? How can I poke holes in these numbers that are defining me? How can I use creative disruption to essentially find a way to make it to the top? And that's the main theme. That is the central point of my talk. It is creative disruption and average millennials approach. So as we begin to understand this idea of what exactly creative disruption is, we have to look at it in 2 different contexts. The first context of creative disruption is defined in marketing, and the second is business. And I'm going to apply 2 examples. We're going to take Snapchat, for example. They came out with these incredibly goofy sunglasses where you can take pictures of other people and video record, and just an overall really goofy product. So how are they going to sell this to the public? How are they going to make this applicable? And so they drop these pods around different cities and all of a sudden create this sense of urgency for these goofy looking spectacles. They use this idea of creative disruption to go against the norm and sell their Snapchat spectacles in a unconventional way. We have creative disruption as it applies in a business context. Let's take the company Amazon, for example. What basically started as a guy selling books out of his garage turned into one of the largest companies that we know today as Amazon.com. But what we don't know is that Amazon is really known for its server databases. That's where it makes the majority of its money. What Amazon did was they took one idea and developed it into something completely different. So we're starting to develop this idea of creative disruption, and essentially everything that we're revolving around is this idea of breaking patterns. How exactly can we find ways to fit in? How can we find ways to be good at things by using creative disruption and breaking these patterns? And so creative disruption is applied in marketing and business. But what about in education? What would it look like to apply this idea of creative disruption amongst the education system? What would it look like to find a niche for these people with super creative minds that want to poke holes in this education system? I run a company, as you may have heard at the beginning. It's called In With the Old. Basically, the idea behind In With the Old is taking vintage, gaudy-looking University of Tennessee clothing, you know, those heavy denim shirts and those big cotton sweatshirts, and selling them for a lot more than I buy them for. So I had this idea, and I figured I'd buy a website and then develop a central marketplace for people to acquire this clothing. And so I figured, why would I pay for a website when I could just use Instagram as a platform to sell my clothing? So I put my clothing up on Instagram, and then people began to comment what they would pay for it. So I used this idea of, here we have Instagram, but let's use it for an entirely different purpose. And now that I'm a business owner about 6 months in, I have this desire to wake up in the morning and look at my analytics. I have a desire to look at the statistics. I have a desire to look at the web traffic that happened last night. My heart gets racing in the morning because I'm so excited to learn what it takes to grow my business. I have this eagerness to learn that was not happening when I was defined by these GPA numbers. It happened when I started my own business. So the question here is, what exactly would it look like if as a freshman I started this business and then I was eager to learn in my public speaking courses, I was eager to learn in my accounting courses, and I was eager to learn in my statistics courses? What would that look like if everybody at the University of Tennessee started off working for a startup or had their own business? This starts with destroying these common misconceptions that we have about ourselves. The first common misconception that we have is that we have no money. The problem here is we spend about $500 per course that we take. What would it look like to take this $500 and develop a business startup course? Another common misconception is that we have no time. What would it look like if we spent a little bit less time binge watching Netflix shows and developed some businesses? The second part is we're too comfortable in our current lifestyles. I'm too comfortable in the standard education system that I'm working through that it would be impossible to go off and create my own business. Why would I ever change that when I need to score this on my ACT, when I need to score this as a GPA average? We're too comfortable in our current lives. The hardest thing about starting In With the Old was initially posting that first product, and I was imagining, what are my friends going to think of me that I'm trying to sell Goodwill items on Instagram? What are they going to think? And this was the hardest part, but I don't know where. I would definitely not be on this stage if I hadn't have taken that initial step and gotten out of my comfort zone. And the last one is grades. What if we de-emphasize grades? What would it look like if we took a little bit of less time studying and a little bit more time writing a business plan? But then we get hit again. The majority of us are millennials, and we have these terrible stereotypes about us. I did some research, and I looked up the 10 most common stereotypes about millennials. And be prepared, it's super encouraging. The first, that we're lazy. The second, that we only take selfies and don't do anything good for society. The third, that we're the worst generation yet. The fourth, that we're all sluts and glory in the hookup culture. The fifth, we're the largest contributors to texting and driving. The sixth, that our lack of settling down, buying houses or cars is going to be the downfall of the economy. The seventh, that the internet and technology is a detriment to our generation and our society. The eighth, that we're materialistic and cynical. The ninth, that we're shallow narcissists and don't do anything good for society. And number 10, that we don't know how to date. I am still trying to figure that one out, but I guarantee you that I can disprove the rest of them. So with all of this negative energy surrounding millennials, what would it look like to use this idea of creative disruption to poke holes and defeat these stereotypes? So I did some more research, and I was curious, what are millennials good at? What are we known for? We're obviously good at something. And so I did some research and came up with about 7 positive attributes towards millennials. The first being that we think of innovation as a science. When you think about science, you think scientific method. And when you think scientific method, it's a standard methodology, a process behind creating something. Us as millennials have this process that we go about thinking of innovation. There's so much going on in this day and age that it's impossible to ignore it. The second, that we believe in the profit motive. Again, what would it look like to take the $500 that we invested in one class and use it to invest in a company? And all of a sudden, we start to generate some revenue. And then all of a sudden, we're super eager to learn because we're making money. And it's very cool. The third, that we could build a business. In our day and age, we have things like WordPress, Shopify, Google Analytics, so many resources that are incredibly applicable to allowing us as a generation to start businesses. I took Instagram, which is used for posting selfies, and just used it for an entirely different purpose. Today we have so many things that are available to us that we can easily start businesses with. We just have to use this idea of how can we disrupt these standard things creatively. The next, that we're motivated. As I mentioned before, I wake up every morning and my heart is racing to see if I made a sale that night, to see what my analytics are, to see how I can target my customers more easily. There's motivation behind creating businesses. Second, that we hate bureaucracy. I could not imagine walking into an office and sitting down from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., plugging in statistics on a Google Excel spreadsheet, and then leaving for the day. I want to be around. I want to be moving. I want to be going from meeting to meeting, and I want to be energized. We hate bureaucracy, and we can defeat it. The next one, that we put some muscle into the corporate culture building. This is important. If we do land these corporate jobs, if we do land ourselves in these corporate structures, how can we poke holes in this system? How can we make it to where we have our millennial touch, to where we use our innovation, to where we use these ideas about creating businesses and change the corporate culture? And the last one is that we want to lead. I have a desire today to speak to you as a leader of a business, as a leader, as an intern, as a leader in my fraternity. I have a desire because I run a business, because everything here that I'm saying is because I want to lead you, and I want you all to be able to experience what I've experienced. So overall, what would it look like if us as University of Tennessee students, if us as graduates, started to use this idea of creative disruption and started to poke holes in our standard system? What would it look like to educate ourselves early on? What would my GPA be if I started my business freshman year? Or does my GPA even need to define me? Dear listener, this talk is designed to tell you everything you need to know about the science of getting ahead. Now let's assume that you're a young, passionate, eager, healthy, ambitious individual, ready to rise quickly and easily to the top of the business world. Know that you can, and know that if you have intelligence, education, and ability, so much the better. But realize that thousands have risen to the top without any of these attributes. Thank you.